Our ability to train depends on the capacity of our bodies to extract energy from the foods we eat. So whether you're running a marathon, doing your local park run, swimming, dancing, cycling, whatever it is, these are all influenced by your energy levels. So if you don't have sufficient energy, you're not going to be able to perform at your best. So this video, we're just going to be looking a bit about energy, the chemistry behind it, and a little bit about carbohydrate, because it is kind of linked quite closely together. So fuel sources from food can be carbohydrate, protein, or fat. Now this is known as macronutrients, so that's a fancy word for carbohydrate, protein, or fat. And each of these contain various amounts of energy, or calories as it's known. So carbohydrate and protein contains 4 calories a gram, and fat contains 9 calories a gram. So whenever you consume any of these macronutrients, they follow a different chemical pathway to provide you with the energy that you need to do whatever you're doing. So each of these pathways ultimately leads to water, carbon dioxide, and a thing called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which is its fancy name. And these are high energy compounds. So whenever you need energy for exercise or just day-to-day activities, your body's going to use these ATP molecules. So now you know a little bit about the chemistry of energy for sport. Let's have a wee look about what it all means for each macronutrient. So the body is able to store some of these fuels in a form that can be called upon to supply the energy to the muscles immediately. So carbohydrates, which come in the form of sugar and starch, these are broken down into glucose, which can be used immediately as a fuel, or it can be stored in the muscle in the liver as a thing called glycogen. So when you're exercising, this muscle glycogen is converted back into glucose, and the muscle fibres then use that as a fuel. So the glycogen that's stored in the liver is also converted back into glucose, but it is released into the bloodstream, and that helps to regulate blood sugar levels as well as being a fuel source for the brain. If necessary, the muscles can also use some of this glucose. So the body is constantly replenishing these glycogen stores, and this is influenced by the carbohydrate content of your diet. If you have a higher carbohydrate diet, then the fuller your glycogen stores are going to be, which means more energy. So with training, you can also influence the size of these stores. So as your muscles are the main site for storage, including weight training into your program is going to help increase the muscle mass, and as a result, it's going to increase the amount of glycogen stores, which means more potential energy. So include weight training, very important. The body is able to store up to about 1,800 to 2,000 calories worth of energy as glycogen. And this is going to be enough to fuel around an hour and a half to 2 hours of vigorous activity. So if you've ever done a marathon and you've been unfortunate enough to hit the wall, you might notice that it tends to occur around the 18-mile mark. Now this is due to the fact that running burns around 100 calories a mile, and 18 miles at 100 calories a mile works out at 1,800 calories, which is likely to be the average glycogen storage capacity of the body. So if you don't know, hitting the wall is simply the body running out of glycogen. And what happens is when these glycogen stores run out, your blood glucose levels drop too low, and it makes you feel absolutely awful, and you run out of energy basically. So to avoid this happening, you need to make sure that you're sufficiently fueled before you start the race. So a high carbohydrate diet in 3 or 4 days prior is really good. If you watch the video on carb loading, that will give you a little bit more information about it. And looking at eating or drinking carbohydrate-based foods during exercise, so things like sports drinks, gels, sweeties, things like that, these can help delay the depletion of muscle glycogen and help you stop the wall coming. So even though fat is the most concentrated energy source at 9 calories a gram, it doesn't mean it is the best. So during exercise, stored fat is broken down into fatty acids, which are transported to the muscles, and they can be then used as fuel. So the issue with relying on fat as a fuel source is this process is a lot slower than using carbohydrates as a fuel source. So unlike glycogen, like fat stores are virtually unlimited, so it does seem it would be a good option. So even those who are very lean, so looking at a very lean athlete, they can have enough fat stored in muscle fibres and fat cells to supply around 100,000 calories. So that is enough for around 1,000 miles of running. So per unit of weight, fat is actually more efficient than carbohydrate because that needs to be stored along with water. So every gram of glycogen, there's about 3 grams of water accompanying it. But how well your body can use fat during exercise depends on how athletically conditioned you are. And for some reason, the ketogenic diet is getting a lot of traction recently, with a lot of people saying it's good for exercise, and this is not true. This is simply not true. There's been a lot of research into this area, and it has been shown that the body is able to adapt to a high-fat, low-carb diet by burning more fat during exercise. However, there is still no evidence to show that keto diets enhance sports performance. In fact, there are actually a lot of studies to show the opposite, and even showing that high-fat diets actually impede athletic performance and lead to an increase in perceived exertion, which basically means the exercise actually felt harder than when on a high-carb diet. So there are studies that look into fat adaptation and performance, but they're small in size and they also lack consistency and definitions of what kind of high fat, low carb is. So again, that weakens the arguments for them. And finally, protein, that can be used as a fuel source, but it's not recommended. The body can't store it as a fuel. Instead, it needs to be used to build, maintain and repair body tissues, as well as making enzymes and hormones, antibodies, basically everything that you need. If we don't fuel properly in the body with things like carbohydrate, then the body can turn to skeletal muscle as a fuel source. Now, this leads to the amino acids which make up protein being converted into glucose, and they supply the energy for exercise as well as allowing full function of the brain. So for exercise performance, you should really be sticking to what has been proven by research. Carbohydrate is the body's best energy source. Carbohydrate is your friend. Do not cut it out. Especially if you're doing a high endurance event, things like marathons, carbohydrate is very, very, very important. So again, looking at carbohydrate, one of the issues with people doing a keto diet, or if you're looking at doing a low carb diet, or whatever, if you're out doing a marathon and you need to top up your energy, carbohydrate is your friend. You can have a sports gel, you can have some sweeties, you could have a sports drink. High fat foods don't tend to sit well in a marathon. So things like cheese, it's not really a very practical thing to carry with you on a marathon, is it? So carbohydrate is very important. Stick to carbohydrate as your main fuel source for training. And look at the resources, use the planner sheets, use the tables to kind of plan what you need. And if you do have any issues, then you know where I am. You can give me a contact and I'll help you a little bit further.